I still have the acceptance letter. It's in a frame now, hanging on the wall of my office on the 3rd floor of the Mercer House, my hotel in Nashville, Tennessee. The paper has yellowed slightly at the edges. The ink is still crisp. Dear Miss Mercer, we are pleased to offer you admission to the Philadelphia College of Architecture. My father read that letter once. He folded it in half, slid it back across the kitchen table, and said without looking up, "Only sons deserve college. Daughters just need to find a man and stay out of the way." Then he got up and poured himself a cup of coffee. That was it. No argument. No discussion. Just the sound of the coffee maker and my mother looking down at her plate, and my brother Derek smirking at something on his phone. I was 17 years old. I framed that letter the day I signed the deed on my first property, not as a reminder of what he said, as a reminder of who I became anyway. And 2 months ago, on the opening night of my second hotel, my father walked through my front doors as a guest, and the first person he saw was Derek, standing at the valet station in uniform, holding someone else's car keys. I watched my father's face from the top of the staircase. I had waited 12 years for that moment, and I hadn't planned a single second of it. If you've ever had to build your entire life as proof this story is for you, subscribe if you want to stay until the end, but only if you genuinely feel something right now. Drop a comment and tell me, did you ever have someone in your life who refused to believe in you? What did you do with that? I read every comment, every one. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Scranton, Pennsylvania is the kind of city where everyone knows what their father did for a living. And in our neighborhood on Elm Court, that was considered enough. Frank Mercer was a plumber, not a contractor, not a business owner, a plumber and proud of it. He had a white truck with his name on the side, a set of tools he kept cleaner than the kitchen, and an opinion about everything. He worked hard. I won't take that away from him. He was up before 5 every morning and home by 6 every evening, and he never once complained about tired legs or aching hands. What he complained about was everything else. The neighbors who thought they were better than him, the college-educated men at church who couldn't fix a leaky pipe if their life depended on it. The way the world kept changing in directions he didn't approve of. And most of all, the idea that a daughter of his might want something more than a decent husband and a clean house. There were 4 of us in that 3-bedroom house on Elm Court: Frank, Donna, Derek, and me. On paper, we were a family. In practice, we were 2 separate households sharing a roof. There was the household Frank cared about, and then there was me. My mother, Donna, worked part-time as a cashier at a grocery store 2 miles from the house. She was gentle in the way that people become gentle when they've spent years choosing peace over truth. She never raised her voice. She never started arguments. She folded herself small and quiet around Frank's opinions like they were a furniture she had learned to walk around. She wasn't cruel. She just wasn't there. Not for me. Not when it counted. Derek was 3 years older than me. He had our father's build, broad shoulders, loud laugh, the kind of confidence that doesn't come from achievement, but from never having been told no. He was the center of every room he walked into, not because he was remarkable, because Frank made sure everyone treated him that way. And I was the other one. I don't say that with self-pity. I say it because it was simply true the way weather is true. It didn't require explanation. It just was. Let me show you what I mean. When Derek was 14, he wanted a gaming console, the kind that cost $350. Frank drove him to the store the same weekend he asked. I remember because I was in the back seat. I didn't ask for anything. I just watched Derek carry the box out of the store while Frank held the door. When I was 13, I asked for a sketchbook and a set of drawing pencils. The good kind, the ones my art teacher used. $12 at the craft store on Main Street. Frank looked at me over his newspaper and said, "What do you need that for?" I said I wanted to draw buildings. He folded the newspaper. Buildings. Yes, I want to be an architect someday. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, more like air escaping from something that didn't need to be opened. Then he went back to his newspaper. I bought the sketchbook myself 3 weeks later with babysitting money. That was the first lesson Frank Mercer ever taught me. Not the one he intended, but the one that mattered. If you want something, find another way. Dinner in our house had a script. Frank would talk about work, a difficult job, a client who didn't appreciate good craftsmanship, a situation he handled better than anyone else could have. Derek would listen and nod. Donna would refill glasses and agree at the right moments. And I would sit at the corner of the table and eat quietly and try not to take up too much space. One evening when I was 15, Frank turned to Derek and asked what he was thinking about for college. Derek shrugged. "Business, maybe. Something where I'm in charge." Frank pointed his fork. "Good. A man needs to know how to run things." He leaned back. "I'll start looking at schools this summer. We'll take a trip. Make a weekend of it." Then, because I was foolish enough to think the question was open to the table, I said, "I've been looking at architecture programs. There's one in Philadelphia that's supposed to be really..." Frank cut me off without turning his head. "You don't need a program in Philadelphia." "But Nadia." He said my name the way you say the word enough, flat, final. "College is for boys who need to build careers. You'll get married. You'll have a home to manage. That's a full-time job." Donna picked up her glass. Derek looked at his phone. I looked at my plate. I was 15 years old, and I had a 4.0 grade point average. Derek had a 2.3. I had won the district architecture competition 2 years in a row with drawings I made on notebook paper, because I still didn't own a proper sketchbook. Derek had failed sophomore English twice, and Frank had hired a tutor without being asked. No one at that table talked about any of that. That was the second lesson. What you achieve doesn't matter. What you are to him is already decided. It was Christmas that year when everything shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just a crack of light under a door I hadn't known was there. Aunt Rosalind came to visit, Frank's younger sister, a retired architect who had spent 30 years designing civic buildings in Portland, Oregon, before moving back east. She was the quiet one in the family, the one Frank called too educated for her own good when she wasn't in the room, and my brilliant sister when she was. He didn't know I noticed the difference. Rosalind sat beside me after dinner while the others watched football in the living room. She picked up the sketchbook I had left on the kitchen counter, the one I had filled with drawings of buildings I had only ever seen in books. She didn't say anything for a long time. She turned page after page slowly, the way you read something you don't want to finish. Then she looked up at me with an expression I had never seen an adult direct at me before. Not pity, not amusement, attention. Real attention. The kind that means I see exactly what this is. "Who taught you proportion like this?" she asked. "Nobody," I said. "I just looked at pictures and tried to copy the lines." She closed the sketchbook carefully, like it was something that deserved to be handled with care. "Nadia," she said quietly, so only I could hear, "you have a gift they can't see. Don't let anyone convince you it isn't there just because they can't see it." I didn't know what to say. I had never heard an adult in my family say anything like that to me. She left the next morning before anyone else was awake. And when I got up and came downstairs, there was something on the kitchen table. A brochure folded in half. Philadelphia College of Architecture, one of the top architecture programs on the East Coast. And underneath it, a handwritten note on a piece of cream-colored paper. You were born to build things. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. R. I read it 4 times, standing in the cold kitchen in my socks. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the back of my sketchbook where no one would find it. I didn't know it then, but that piece of paper would outlast everything Frank Mercer thought he had built. The next 2 years, I stopped asking for anything. Not because I had given up, because I had learned to redirect. Every dollar I earned, babysitting every birthday card with a 20 inside every small thing I could set aside, I saved. I kept a notebook in the back of my closet where I tracked every amount. $12 here, $25 there. By the time I was 16, I had $430 in a shoebox under my bed. Not enough for college, but enough to understand something important. I was the only person who was going to get me there. School was the one place Frank's opinions couldn't follow me. I was good at it in a way that felt less like talent and more like oxygen. I needed it to survive. While Derek coasted through classes on charm and the goodwill of teachers who liked his laugh, I sat in the front row and took notes with 2 different colored pens and stayed after class to ask questions that weren't on the test. My GPA held at 4.0 all the way through junior year. I won the district architecture competition for the 3rd time. My art teacher, Mr. Callahan, submitted my drawings to a regional design showcase without telling me. I placed 2nd out of 240 entries. Frank never knew. I never told him because I already knew what he would say. The summer before senior year, things shifted again, this time not in my favor. Frank sat Derek down at the kitchen table one July evening and announced that he had made appointments to tour 3 universities in the fall: Penn State, University of Pittsburgh, and Villanova. He had already spoken to a financial advisor about education funds. He had already mapped out the driving routes. I was sitting at the counter doing homework. No one looked at me. I kept my eyes on my textbook. 3 days later, I asked Frank, carefully, quietly, the way I had learned to ask him things, whether we might also look at architecture programs. Just to look, just to have the information. He was watching television. He didn't mute it. I already told you, college is for boys who need to build careers. But I have a 4.0. I placed in a national Tinky Nadia. Same tone as always, flat, final. Stop pushing. You're making it into something it isn't. I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the shoebox under it. $430. It wasn't enough, but it was mine. And no one could fold it in half and slide it back across the table. Junior year became senior year, and senior year brought the SAT. I studied alone, no tutor, no prep course. I used library books and free practice tests I printed at the school computer lab. I took the exam on a Saturday morning in October and walked out of the testing center, feeling like I had run a marathon in the wrong shoes, exhausted, uncertain, but still standing. 6 weeks later, my score arrived. 1,480. I stared at the number for a long time. Then I folded the paper and put it in the back of my sketchbook next to Rosalind's note. I didn't show Frank. I already knew what he would say. What I didn't expect was what happened the following week. Frank came home from work on a Thursday, looking pleased with himself in the specific way that meant he had spent money he was proud of. He dropped his keys on the counter and announced to the room, to no one in particular, that he had hired a private SAT tutor for Derek. third attempt, he said like it was a minor administrative note. We'll get him to at least 1,100, that's all he needs. Derek was sitting on the couch eating chips. He raised his hand in acknowledgement without looking up. I was at the kitchen counter. I thought about my 1,480. I said nothing. This is the thing about being invisible in your own family. After a while, it stops feeling like injustice. It just feels like weather. You stop expecting the sun on certain days. You dress accordingly and you keep moving, but January of senior year, the sun came anyway. Philadelphia College of Architecture sent me a letter. I hadn't told anyone I applied. I had requested the fee waiver form from my guidance counselor in September, told her it was for a friend, and mailed the application myself from the post office on Oak Street during my lunch break. I used Rosalind's note as my personal statement inspiration. I wrote about proportion, about teaching myself to see the way buildings breathe. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. I was home alone, Frank at work, Donna at the grocery store, Derek at a friend's house. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it. Dear Miss Mercer, we are pleased to offer you admission to the Philadelphia College of Architecture. We are also pleased to offer you a merit scholarship in the amount of $11,000 per academic year, renewable for 4 years, based on satisfactory academic progress. I read it twice, then I cried, quietly, alone at the kitchen table, not because I was sad, because for the first time in my life, something outside my family had looked at what I made and said, "This is enough. You are enough." I wiped my face, I folded the letter, I put it in my bag, and then I made a mistake. I told them at dinner, I don't know what I expected. Some small version of acknowledgement maybe, not a party, not tears, just something. A nod, a pause in the chewing. I slid the letter across the table toward Frank. He picked it up, he read it. His jaw moved slowly like he was chewing something that had gone tough. Then he folded it in half. He slid it back. "Only sons deserve college," he said without looking up. "Daughters just need to find a man and stay out of the way." He picked up his fork. Donna looked down at her plate. Derek smirked at something on his phone. He didn't even glance at the letter. I sat very still. The clock on the microwave said 6:47. Outside, a car drove past. The refrigerator hummed. Everything in the world continued exactly as it had been 1 minute ago. Except something inside me had shifted. Not broken, not collapsed, just repositioned. Like a bone that had been slightly out of place, finally clicking back into alignment. Quiet, definitive, permanent. I picked up the letter. I put it back in my bag. I finished my dinner. I did the dishes. And that night I called Rosalind from the parking lot of the gas station 2 blocks away, standing in the cold with my jacket zipped to my chin, because I didn't want anyone in that house to hear my voice. She answered on the second ring. "I got in," I said. "Full merit scholarship. 11,000 a year." There was a pause. Then she made a sound I had never heard from her before. Something between a laugh and an exhale, like she'd been holding her breath for 2 years and had finally been given permission to let it go. "I know," she said softly. "I always knew." He said no. "I know that too. I'm going anyway." Another pause, shorter this time. "I know that, most of all," she said. I stood in that parking lot for another 10 minutes after we hung up. The cold didn't bother me. I was thinking about proportion, about the way a building distributes its weight so it can stand, despite everything pressing down on it. I was 17 years old, and I had just decided that no one, not even my father, got to determine the load-bearing walls of my life. The Monday after graduation, I left. Not dramatically, not with a speech. I packed 2 bags the night before, one with clothes, one with my sketchbooks and the acceptance letter and Rosalind's note, and I set them by the bedroom door while Frank and Donna were watching television downstairs. I could hear the low murmur of the TV through the floor. I could hear Derek in his room playing video games, the same console Frank had bought him 4 years ago, without a second thought. I didn't sleep much. At 6:15 in the morning, I carried both bags downstairs. The house was quiet. Donna was still in bed. Frank's coffee mug was on the counter. He had already left for work. Derek's door was closed. I tore a piece of paper from the notepad by the phone. I wrote 4 words, "I'll be fine. Don't worry." I left it on the kitchen table. Then I picked up my bags and walked out the front door of the house on Elm Court for the last time as someone who lived there. The bus to Philadelphia took 3 hours and 40 minutes. I had a window seat. I watched Scranton disappear behind me, and I didn't cry. I had already cried everything I needed to cry in that parking lot 3 months earlier. What I felt now was different, quieter. Something that sat low in my chest and hummed steadily like an engine that had finally found the right gear. I had enough money for the first semester's remaining balance after the scholarship, barely. I had arranged a work-study position through the financial aid office. I had found a room in a shared apartment near campus with 3 other students, $280 a month, utilities split 4 ways. I had a meal plan for the first semester and a part-time job lined up at a coffee shop 6 blocks from campus, starting the second week of school. I had planned every detail myself. No one had helped me. No one had checked my work. No one had co-signed anything. Frank did not call for 7 months. 7 months! I kept track. Not obsessively, I wasn't waiting by the phone. But I noticed. The way you notice when a room that used to have furniture in it is empty. Not painful exactly, just different. Quieter. More space than you expected. Donna called twice in the first month. Short calls. Careful, like she was choosing each word from a limited selection. She asked if I was eating. I said yes. She asked if it was cold. I said, sometimes. Neither of us mentioned Frank. Neither of us mentioned Derek. She never asked how my classes were going. I never offered. The calls stopped after the second month. I told myself it didn't matter. I almost believed it. What did matter, what I held on to like a rope in dark water, was the work itself. Philadelphia College of Architecture was the first place in my life where what I made was the only thing anyone cared about. Not who my father was, not whether I had a plan for after, not whether I was being realistic. Just the work. Just the lines in the page and the logic behind them and the way a structure could be both honest and beautiful at the same time. I was good at it. Not in the way I had been good at high school, quiet competence in a place that didn't notice. Here people noticed. My first-year professor, a tall, sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Elaine Cho, stopped at my drafting table during a studio critique in October and looked at my sectional drawing for a long time without speaking. The room went a little quieter around her. Then she said simply, "This is the most considered first-year work I've seen in 3 years. Don't lose that instinct." I kept my face neutral. I thanked her. I waited until she moved to the next table. Then I wrote what she said in the back of my sketchbook. I needed to keep it somewhere real. That December, Rosalind called. Not a short call, a long one. She asked about my projects. She asked about my professors. She asked real questions, the kind that required real answers, and she listened to all of them. An hour into the conversation, she said something that changed the shape of the next 4 years. "Nadia, I want to tell you something. I should have told you sooner. When you were 12 years old and I saw your drawings for the first time, I opened a savings account in your name. I've been adding to it every year since then." I didn't say anything. "It's not a fortune," she continued, "but it's $8,000. It's yours. It has always been yours. I was waiting for you to need it. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed in my narrow room in Philadelphia and looked at the wall. $8,000. 6 years of quiet, steady faith from the one person in my family who had looked at what I made and understood immediately what it was." "Why didn't you tell me before?" I finally asked. "Because before, you were still in that house," she said. "And I was afraid that if Frank found out, he would find a way to take it." I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. I thought about what it meant that Rosalind had hidden money from her own brother for 6 years to protect his daughter. What it meant that she had seen me clearly enough at 12 years old to decide I was worth that kind of long, patient faith. I used $3,000 of it to pay off the remainder of my first year balance. I put the rest away and didn't touch it. Meanwhile, back in Scranton, something was unraveling that no one in my family was talking about yet. Derek had started at the community college in September. The school Frank had thrown a barbecue to celebrate the school with the future CEO cake. He had moved into the basement of the house on Elm Court, and Frank was paying his tuition directly $16,000 for the first academic year, transferred to the school's billing office in August. By November, Derek had stopped going to class. Not all at once. First, it was the 8 a.m. lectures, then the afternoon ones. By mid-semester, he was attending roughly 2 sessions a week and spending the rest of his time at a sports bar on Jefferson Avenue called The Overtime, where he had developed a habit of placing bets on college basketball games through an app on his phone. He lost consistently. He was not deterred. By December, he had lost $2,600 of money he didn't have. He had opened a credit card in his own name, the first of what would eventually be 3, and charged most of it within 90 days. Frank didn't know. Donna didn't know. No one knew because Derek was careful in the specific way that people are careful when they are doing something they cannot afford to have discovered. He intercepted his own mail. He answered his own calls. He maintained at dinner every night the performance of a young man who was simply taking his time figuring things out. And Frank believed him. Because Frank needed to believe him. Because Derek was the investment. Derek was the proof that Frank Mercer's way of seeing the world was correct. If Derek was failing, then Frank was wrong. And Frank Mercer did not allow himself to be wrong. Back in Philadelphia, I knew none of this. I was sitting in a studio at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, surrounded by trace paper and scale rulers and cold coffee, drawing a building that existed only in my imagination but felt more real to me than anything I had left behind in Scranton. My professor, Howard Klein, stopped by the studio that night. He did that, sometimes late rounds, to check on students who were deep in a project. He looked at what I was working on. He pulled up a stool and sat down. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "In 20 years of teaching, I've seen maybe 3 students draw like you. Don't waste it." I looked at him. "I don't intend to," I said. He nodded. He got up. He moved on to the next table. I turned back to my drawing. Outside Philadelphia was dark and cold and indifferent to all of it. Inside, something was being built. Quietly, carefully, one precise line at a time. I graduated with honors on a Friday morning in May. The ceremony was held in a courtyard outside the main architecture building. 350 chairs arranged in rows, a string quartet playing something classical that I didn't recognize but found oddly perfect. The sky was the specific shade of blue that only exists in early summer before the heat sets in and flattens everything. Rosalind was in the front row. She had flown in from Portland 2 days early. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer and the kind of expression that people wear when they have been waiting a long time for something and it has finally actually arrived. When they called my name, Nadia Mercer graduated with honors, recipient of the Howard Klein Award for Excellence in Architectural Design. She stood up before I had even crossed the stage. She was the only person standing. My parents did not come. Frank had called 3 days before the ceremony, a short call, businesslike the way he made all his calls. "We won't make the drive," he said. "It's 4 hours each way." "I know how far it is, Dad. Your mother's back has been acting up." I had heard that excuse before. Donna's back acted up whenever Frank needed a reason that wasn't the truth. "Okay," I said. "Congratulations," he said. Then he hung up. I stood in my apartment holding the phone for a moment. Then I put it down and went back to packing for the ceremony. 4 hours. They had driven 4.5 hours to watch Derek play in a high school football game his sophomore year. A regular season game? A game his team lost by 14 points? Frank had taken photos and posted them on Facebook with the caption, "That's my boy." But 4 hours for a graduation with honors was too far. I had stopped being surprised by the math. I had just never quite stopped feeling it. What I felt on that stage, walking across to collect my diploma with Rosalind on her feet in the front row, was something I chose to hold on to instead. Her face, her standing, the specific sound of one person's applause in a courtyard, 350 people, that was enough. I made it enough. After the ceremony, Rosalind took me to dinner at a restaurant on Rittenhouse Square. White tablecloths, a wine list I couldn't afford to look at without her. She ordered champagne without consulting the menu, and when the glasses arrived, she lifted hers and looked at me for a long moment before she spoke. "Your father is going to spend the rest of his life understanding what he missed today," she said. "I want you to know that I understand it right now, every bit of it." I didn't trust my voice for a moment. "Thank you for being here," I finally said. There is nowhere else I would have been. We clinked glasses. Outside the restaurant window, Philadelphia moved past in its usual indifferent way, cabs and pedestrians, and the particular noise of a city that doesn't pause for anyone's milestones. I didn't mind. I had learned to find my footing in indifferent places the next 3 years I spent building. Not hotels yet, not even close. I was 22 years old with a degree and award and a professor's recommendation letter. I took a position at a small architecture firm in Philadelphia called Hartwell and Associates, 9 employees, a converted row house on Spruce Street projects that were mostly residential renovations and the occasional small commercial build. It wasn't glamorous. It was exactly what I needed. I learned things in those 3 years that no classroom had taught me. How to manage a client who changes their mind 17 times and bills accordingly, how to read a contractor's estimate for the places where the numbers don't add up, how to stand in an empty space, a gutted kitchen, a stripped storefront, a bare concrete floor, and see what it could become instead of what it was. I saved aggressively. I lived in the same apartment on Pine Street for all 3 years. splitting rent with a rotating cast of roommates eating lunch at my desk wearing the same 4 work outfits on a schedule, so no one would notice. I had a savings account I added to every single month without exception, even the months when it was only $50, even the months when it hurt. By the time I was 25, I had $31,000 saved, and Professor Klein called. He had a former student, a real estate developer named Patrick Osei, who was looking for a young architect with vision for a project in Nashville, a conversion job. An old textile warehouse in East Nashville that Patrick had acquired cheaply and wanted to transform into something. He wasn't sure what yet. That was specifically why he needed someone with vision rather than someone with a portfolio of safe residential work. Klein had given Patrick my name. I flew to Nashville on a Thursday. I met Patrick in the warehouse on a Friday morning. It was February, cold even in Tennessee, the light coming through the broken skylights in long, pale bars across the concrete floor. I walked the space for 45 minutes without saying much. Patrick followed me and waited. Then I stopped in the center of the main floor and looked up. The ceiling was 32 feet high, original timber beams, north-facing skylights. A loading dock on the east wall that could be converted into floor-to-ceiling glass. The bones were extraordinary. "A hotel," I said. Patrick looked at me. "Boutique? 12 rooms maximum. High-end? The neighborhood is changing. You can see it already on the blocks around here. In 3 years, this area will be exactly where people want to stay when they come to Nashville and want something that isn't a chain." Patrick was quiet for a moment. "How long would the conversion take?" 14 months if we move fast. 18 to be safe." "And cost?" I had been running numbers in my head since I walked in the door. "Rough estimate, 800,000 to 1.2 million, depending on finishes. You could recoup within 4 years at the right room rate." Patrick looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then he said, "Okay, draw me something." I drew him something. He funded the project. I poured 3 years of savings and a small business loan into a minority stake that Patrick offered because Klein had told him I was worth it, and Patrick trusted Klein's word completely. That was how the Mercer house began. I named it on a Tuesday evening, sitting alone at a drafting table in the half-renovated warehouse surrounded by material samples and cost projections. I turned the name over in my mind for a while. The Mercer house, my father's name, my name, the name he had made synonymous in my mind with being told I was not enough. I was going to put it on a building he could never have built, not as revenge, as reclamation. I named it the Mercer House. Not for him, for the name I was given chose to make mean something different. I was 26 years old when the project broke ground. Back in Scranton, a different kind of ground was breaking. Donna called on a Wednesday evening in March. Her voice was different, softer than usual, and underneath the softness, something tight and careful, like a person walking on ice they're not sure will hold. Frank had injured his back on a job site. Herniated disc. He was out of work and would be for at least 3 months, possibly longer. The medical bills were adding up. Their savings, she said, were not what they used to be. And then almost, as an aside, the way you mention something you're hoping won't be examined too closely. Derek said he could help, but he's been very busy with his internship. I held the phone against my ear. Something about that sentence didn't sit right. Not the words, the rhythm. The way she said internship with a slight pause before it, like she was picking up a word someone else had put down and wasn't entirely sure it belonged to her. "Which company is he interning at?" I asked. A pause. Brief, but there. "It's a consulting firm." Downtown. He's been doing really well. What's the name? I'd have to ask him. You know how Derek is? He doesn't like to talk about work too much. He's modest. Heist. Derek had never been modest about anything in his life. I said I was glad Frank was getting treatment. I said I hoped things settled down soon. I kept my voice warm and even and gave nothing away. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table in Philadelphia and opened my laptop. I searched for consulting firms in downtown Scranton. I searched for Derek Mercer. I searched for the name Donna had used, halting, uncertain, slightly too casual. Nothing. No company, no profile, no record of anything that matched. The refrigerator hummed. The street outside was quiet. It was nearly midnight. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. Something was wrong. I didn't know yet how wrong. I didn't know yet that the answer would arrive in the form of a phone notification on Donna's forgotten phone face up on a kitchen counter on a day I hadn't planned to go home. But I would find out. Very soon, I would find out everything. I drove to Scranton on a Saturday morning in April. I told myself it was because of Frank's back. Because Donna had sounded tired on the phone. Because it was the reasonable adult thing to do when your father is injured and your mother is struggling and you have a car and a free weekend. I told myself that. I almost believed it. The truth was simpler and harder. I needed to see the house with my own eyes. I needed to stand in that kitchen and look at my parents' faces when they talked about Derek and see whether what I suspected showed up somewhere in the way they held themselves, in the pauses, in the things they didn't say. I had learned growing up in that house to read the silences better than the words. I arrived at 11 in the morning. Frank was in the living room. In a recliner leg, elevated a heating pad across his lower back. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, he was still the same broad-shouldered man he had always been. But something about the recliner and the heating pad and the afternoon television had reduced him in a way I hadn't expected. He looked like a man who had been interrupted mid-sentence and couldn't remember what he was saying. He looked up when I walked in. "You didn't have to come all this way," he said. "I know," I said. That was the entirety of our greeting. Donna was in the kitchen. She hugged me brief, careful the way she did everything, and immediately began making coffee and moving things around on the counter with the specific busyness of a woman who needed her hands occupied. She asked about the drive. She asked about the weather in Philadelphia. She asked whether I was eating enough. She did not ask about my work. She never asked about my work. I sat at the kitchen table, the same chairs, the same window, looking out at the same narrow backyard, and I watched her move around the kitchen, and I waited. 20 minutes and Donna's phone buzzed on the counter. She was at the sink with her back to it. She didn't hear it over the running water. I wasn't trying to look. The phone was face up 2 feet from where I was sitting, and the notification was simply there. Bright white text on a dark screen visible for 4 seconds before it dimmed. Final notice, account ending 4471 payment. Overdue 90 days. Please call to arrange. The screen went dark. I looked back at my coffee. Donna turned off the tap, dried her hands, reached for her phone without looking at the screen, and slipped it into her pocket. Neither of us said anything, but I had seen it, and she knew I had seen it. And we both sat with that knowledge in the small kitchen and said nothing at all about it. That afternoon, while Frank slept and Donna was in the garden, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and I went looking. I started with the consulting firm the name Donna had given me on the phone, halting and uncertain. I searched every variation I could think of. Nothing. No business registration in Pennsylvania, no website, no LinkedIn page, no address. The company did not exist in any database I could access, and I knew how to access most of them. Then I searched for Derek, not his social media, his financial footprint. It took me 40 minutes and 3 different public records databases. What I found sat on my screen like something that had been waiting a long time to be seen. 3 personal loans, 2 taken out in Derek's name, 1 co-signed by Frank Mercer, a signature I recognized because I had seen it on school forms my entire childhood, the particular backward slant of the capital F. The combined total across all 3 accounts was $42,000. The collateral listed on the co-signed loan was the house on Elm Court. The payment history on all 3 accounts showed the same pattern. Regular payments for 5 months, then missed, then a grace period, then nothing. The most recent account had been in default for 9 months. 9 months. The bank had been sending notices for 9 months. To this address, to this kitchen. And Frank had either not opened them or had opened them and chosen in the specific way he chose things that contradicted his belief in Derek not to see. I sat at that table for a long time. Outside, I could hear Donna moving around in the garden. Inside the refrigerator hummed its steady, indifferent hum. On the counter, the coffee maker ticked as it cooled. I printed the documents on the small printer in the hallway that Donna used for coupons. I stacked them neatly, I stapled them in the corner. Then I waited for dinner. Frank came to the table slowly, one hand on the wall, the heating pad replaced by a careful stillness that he wore like armor. He sat down. Donna put food on the table. The 3 of us sat the way we had always sat, Frank at the head, Donna to his left, me in the corner. I waited until he had taken 3 bites. Then I placed the documents on the table in front of him. He looked at them without touching them. "What is this?" "Derek's loan accounts," I said. "All 3 of them. The house is listed as collateral on the one you co-signed. It's been in default for 9 months." Frank's jaw stopped moving. Donna set down her fork very quietly. The kitchen was absolutely still. Then Frank looked up at me. And what I saw on his face in that moment was not what I expected. It wasn't grief. It wasn't shame. It was something colder and more familiar, the particular expression of a man who has been caught in a position he cannot defend and has decided in real time to attack instead. "Why are you digging into family business?" His voice was low and measured. "This is between me and my son. The bank is going to take the house, Dad." I said, "This is between me and my son." "There is no son here. Derek hasn't been at that consulting firm because there is no consulting firm. I checked. The company doesn't exist. Whatever Derek has been doing for the past 7 years, it isn't working at a company downtown." Donna made a small sound. Not quite a word. "Just air." Frank's eyes moved to her and back to me. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I have the loan documents right there. I have the default notices. I have the search results showing no business registration under that name in the entire state of Pennsylvania." Frank pushed the papers back across the table toward me. "Where is Derek?" I asked. "Not the story. Where is he actually?" Silence. 17 seconds of it. I counted, not because I was measuring, because the silence had a texture to it, a weight. And I needed something to hold on to while I sat inside it. Then Frank set down his fork with the deliberate slowness of a man performing composure. "He's figuring things out," he said. "Men take longer to find their path." I looked at him. "And women." He met my eyes. "Women don't need paths," he said. "They need husbands." Something happened inside me in that moment. Not an explosion, not a collapse, something quieter and more complete than either of those things. Like a door closing on a room you have spent years standing in the doorway of unable to decide whether to enter or leave. And then one day, without drama, without ceremony, the door simply closes. Not because someone slammed it, because you finally stopped holding it open. I looked at my father for a long moment. I looked at my mother, who was staring at the table with the expression of a woman who had been staring at tables her entire adult life. I looked at the corner chair, Derek's chair, empty, as it had been for years, still somehow dominating the room by its absence. Then I stood up. I picked up my bag. I left the documents on the table. I walked to the front door and I opened it, and I said without turning around, "I'm done waiting for an apology." The door closed behind me. I sat in my car for 3 minutes with my hands on the steering wheel and the engine off. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I was very, very still in the way that you are. Still, after something that has been building for 12 years finally reaches the only possible conclusion. Then I started the engine. I drove back to Philadelphia in 4 hours, alone. The highway was dark and long and completely indifferent to everything I was carrying. Somewhere on Route 80, somewhere in the stretch between the last Scranton exit and the first sign for Philadelphia, something settled into place inside me with the quiet permanence of a foundation being poured. Not revenge, not anger, just a decision clean and simple and irreversible. I was going to build something so undeniable that silence would be the only honest response. The Mercer House opened on a Thursday morning in October. 12 rooms, 32-foot ceilings. Original timber beams stained the color of dark honey, north-facing skylights that flooded the upper corridor with the kind of light that makes people stop walking and look up without knowing why. The loading dock on the east wall had become exactly what I imagined that February morning, standing in the cold floor-to-ceiling glass, looking out over a courtyard garden that I had designed myself down to the placement of every stone. I stood in the lobby at 7 in the morning, 2 hours before the first guests arrived, and looked at what had been a gutted textile warehouse 18 months earlier. I had built this, not metaphorically, literally. I had drawn every line. I had selected every material. I had stood on scaffolding in a hard hat arguing with contractors about the exact depth of the window reveals and the precise temperature of the light in the guest corridors. I had spent 14 months making 10,000 decisions, large and small, and every single one of them was present in what I was looking at right now. I pressed my hand flat against the lobby wall. The plaster was smooth and cool. Then I went upstairs to my office on the 3rd floor, sat down at my desk, and looked at the acceptance letter in its frame on the wall. "Dear Miss Mercer, we are pleased to offer you admission." I had kept my promise to myself. The first review appeared online 4 days after opening. A travel writer from a Nashville lifestyle publication had stayed in room 7, the corner room with the longest sightline through the east glass. She wrote 800 words. The headline was, "The Mercer House is the most beautiful small hotel in Nashville, possibly in the South." I read it 3 times at my desk with cold coffee, and then forwarded it to Rosalind without comment. She replied in 40 seconds. 4 words. I always knew. Always. By the end of the first month, we were at 87% occupancy. By the end of the second, we had a waiting list for weekend rooms that stretched 6 weeks out. Architectural Digest reached out in January. They were running a feature on emerging designers redefining American hospitality spaces. Would I be available for an interview and a photo shoot? I was available. The feature ran in the March issue, 4 pages. A full-page photograph of the lobby, the timber beams, and the light, and the particular quality of stillness that I had worked so hard to build into the space. A half-page photograph of me standing at my drafting table in the third-floor office, the framed letter visible on the wall behind me if you looked closely enough. Nobody in Scranton saw it, or if they did, nobody called. That was fine. I wasn't building for Scranton. Rosalind flew in from Portland the week the magazine hit newsstands. She arrived on a Tuesday evening with a carry-on bag and a bottle of champagne she had carried on the plane in her personal item wrapped in a sweater to protect it. She walked into the lobby of the Mercer House and stopped just inside the door, the way she had stopped in my college studio years before, still attentive, taking in the whole space before she said anything. Then she looked up at the ceiling. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the lighting. "I always knew," she said, softly, more to herself than to me. "I always knew." We sat in the courtyard garden that evening with her champagne and glasses I had chosen for this hotel, and she told me about a building she had designed 30 years ago in Portland, a small civic library in a neighborhood that people had written off a building that took 4 years to fund and 2 years to build, and that was, she said, still standing and still full of people every single day. She told me about the moment she had stood in its doorway on opening day and understood something she had not been able to articulate before. "The building doesn't care about the people who said it couldn't exist," she said. "It just stands there and does what it was made to do. That's the only answer that matters." I thought about that for a long time after she went to bed. The building doesn't care. It just stands. Back in Scranton, things were continuing to deteriorate in ways I was only partially aware of. Frank had returned to work after 4 months of recovery, but the injury had changed things. He couldn't take the same jobs he used to. Heavy plumbing work, the kind that required crawling under houses, working in tight spaces, lifting equipment in awkward positions, was no longer possible. He had shifted to smaller residential calls, less money, slower weeks. The medical bills from the injury had taken most of what they had saved, and Derek was still gone. Not physically, he had drifted back to Scranton sometime in the fall, sleeping in his old bedroom, eating Donna's food, driving Frank's second car. But the fiction had finally quietly collapsed. There was a consulting firm. There had never been a consulting firm. Frank had asked eventually, and Derek had answered in the vague, circular way. He answered everything. Things didn't work out. The market was rough. He was regrouping, and Frank had accepted this, the same way he had accepted everything about Derek, by deciding that the failure was temporary and the potential was permanent. The 3 credit accounts remained in default. The bank had sent a formal notice about the house in November. Frank had not told Donna. He had put the letter in a kitchen drawer and closed it and walked away, the way you walk away from something you have decided not to be true yet. I didn't know about the November letter. I found out later. What I did know, what I was focused on entirely, was the second hotel. Patrick Osei had come back to me in the summer with a new property, a former post office building in the Germantown neighborhood of Nashville, larger than the warehouse, more complicated structurally, more expensive. But the bones again were extraordinary: terrazzo floors, tall arched windows, original bronze postal fixtures that had somehow survived 60 years of neglect and 2 decades of vacancy. I said yes before he finished describing it. Planning took 6 months. Financing took 4. We broke ground in February, 14 months after the Mercer House had opened its doors. This time I had a small team, a project architect I had hired named Simone, a junior designer named Will, and a construction manager named Ray. who had worked on renovations across Nashville for 20 years and knew every subcontractor in the city. I was 28 years old. I had a staff. I had a second project under construction. I had a framed magazine feature on my office wall next to the acceptance letter. And somewhere in Nashville, without knowing it, my brother Derek had started looking for work. Not because he had reformed, not because he had grown, because the money had run out completely, the credit cards were maxed, and Frank had finally, quietly, without fanfare, without the dramatic confrontation the situation deserved, told him that the basement bedroom was no longer available. Derek had taken a bus to Nashville in March because a friend of a friend had told him the job market was good there. He had stayed in a budget motel on Dickerson Pike for 2 weeks while he looked for something that didn't require a degree or a verifiable work history. He found a few things, short term. Nothing that held. In April, he saw a job posting for a valet supervisor position at a new boutique hotel opening in East Nashville. The listing mentioned competitive hourly pay, flexible scheduling, and a professional environment. It required a valid driver's license and strong interpersonal skills. Derek had both of those things. He submitted his resume on a Tuesday afternoon through a standard online portal. The application asked for a cover letter. He wrote 4 sentences. It asked for references. He listed 3 people, 2 of whom no longer answered his calls. He clicked submit. He had no idea whose name was on the building. He had no idea whose signature was at the bottom of every paycheck his future employer would issue. He had no idea that the woman who would approve his hire was at that exact moment sitting in a 3rd-floor office in East Nashville looking at a framed acceptance letter on the wall planning a grand opening that would change everything. But I didn't know about his application yet either. That came later. That came on a Tuesday morning when Marcus, my director of operations, the person I trusted most in the building, walked into my office with the folder of final round candidates for the valet supervisor position and set it on my desk. "Last one," he said. "Good interview, clean record. I think he's our guy." I opened the folder. I looked at the name. Derek Mercer, Scranton, Pennsylvania. The office was very quiet. I read it once, twice. The words didn't change. I sat with that folder open on my desk for a long time. Marcus was still standing in the doorway, waiting for me to say something. He had the relaxed posture of a man who expected a simple yes or no and was prepared to move on with his afternoon either way. I looked at the name again. Derek Mercer, Scranton, Pennsylvania. Date of birth placing him at 26 years old. A driver's license number. 3 references, one of which I recognized as a friend of Derek's from high school, who had moved to Nashville 2 years ago. The friend of a friend Donna had once mentioned in passing. I thought about 15 seconds of my life in that office. Then I closed the folder and looked up at Marcus. "What was your read on him?" I asked. Marcus shrugged. "Personable. Good with people. Showed up on time, dressed appropriately, made eye contact. References were a little thin, but his record is clean, and he seems like he can handle a front-of-house environment." He paused. "He's not the strongest candidate on paper, but in person, he has the right energy for the role." I nodded slowly. "Hire him," I said. "If he's the right fit, hire him." Marcus nodded, picked up the folder, and left. I turned my chair to face the window. Below me, East Nashville moved through its ordinary Tuesday morning, a delivery truck double parked on the street. 2 women walking a dog past the entrance, a contractor's van pulling up to the building across the road. Ordinary, unremarkable. The world continuing its business with total indifference to the fact that I had just approved the hire of my brother without telling his future supervisor that we shared a last name and a kitchen table, and and 12 years of silence. I hadn't planned this. I want to be clear about that. I had not engineered it. I had not found Derek and steered him toward my hotel. He had found me accidentally blindly through a generic job posting on a generic website, and the universe had placed his resume on my desk with the particular dark humor of something that has been building for a long time and finally decides to arrive. All I had done was stay out of its way. I did not call Derek. I did not tell Marcus the truth. I did not warn Frank. I let the process complete itself, the way a machine completes a cycle methodically, without interference, doing exactly what it was designed to do. Derek started work on a Monday. Marcus sent me the onboarding confirmation by email. I read it at my desk and then set my phone face down and went back to reviewing the construction timeline for the second hotel. 3 weeks passed. The grand opening of the second hotel, the former post office building in Germantown, now operating as the Mercer Post, was scheduled for a Saturday evening in October. 300 guests, a catered reception, a string quartet I had booked 4 months in advance, because the acoustics of the lobby with its terrazzo floors and arched ceilings were extraordinary, and I wanted music that would fill the space properly. I had sent 2 invitations to Scranton. Frank and Donna Mercer, 41 Elm Court. I had written the address by hand on cream-colored envelopes, the same color as the paper Rosalind had used for her note all those years ago. I had included a handwritten card inside each one. You are invited to the grand opening of the Mercer Post. I would like you to be there. Nadia. Not a warm letter, not a cold one, just a fact and a request. Donna called 3 days after the invitations arrived. Her voice was different, lighter than I expected, with an uncertainty underneath it, like someone who has been invited somewhere they're not sure they deserve to go. "We'll come," she said. "Frank says we'll come." "Good," I said. "I'll have a car pick you up from the hotel." There is a pause. "You're putting us up at a hotel?" "Yes." Another pause, longer. "Nadia," she said, and then stopped. Started again. It's going to be beautiful, isn't it?" It wasn't quite a question. "Yes," I said. "It is." The night of the opening, I was on the second floor landing at 8 o'clock when the car I had sent brought Frank and Donna through the front entrance. I watched from above. Frank was wearing his good shirt, a navy button-down I recognized from Christmas dinners, pressed carefully collar straight. He moved more slowly than the last time I had seen him, the injury still present in the careful way he placed his weight. But he was upright, he was here. Donna was beside him in a dress I had never seen before. She must have bought it for tonight. They stood just inside the entrance and looked up. The lobby opened above them like something exhaled rather than built, the terrazzo floors catching the warm light. The original bronze postal fixtures, repurposed as wall sconces, casting long amber shadows across the arched ceiling. The string quartet in the far corner filling the space with something low and unhurried that seemed to come from inside the walls rather than from 4 people with instruments. Frank's head went back slowly. He looked at the ceiling for a long time. I watched his face. I had designed that ceiling. I had fought with a structural engineer for 3 weeks to preserve the original plasterwork. I had selected the lighting temperature 2,700 Kelvin warm without being yellow after testing 11 different options on a Saturday morning with a color meter and a notepad. Frank didn't know any of that. He just looked up. And then the front door opened behind him, and a couple came in, and the valet, who had been outside managing the car queue, stepped into the entrance to hand off a set of keys to his colleague. He stepped into the light. He looked up to find his colleague. and instead he found his father. The lobby didn't stop. The string quartet continued. The 300 guests continued their conversations and their champagne. The world did not pause for what happened in the entrance of the Mercer Post at 8:14 on a Saturday evening in October, but I paused. I stood on the second floor landing with my hand on the railing, and I watched. Derek in his black uniform with the gold trim, a set of car keys in his right hand, standing 6 feet from Frank Mercer in his good navy shirt. Neither of them moved. Frank's face, the face that had told me daughters don't need paths, that had slid my acceptance letter back across the table, that had looked at my life's work and offered nothing, that face did something I had never seen it do. It went completely still, not angry, not defensive, just still, the way a person goes still when they are confronted with something they cannot explain away, cannot deflect, cannot fold in half and slide back across the table. Derek lowered his eyes first, then he looked up, and he found me on the landing above the lobby, standing in a black dress with my hand on the railing, looking directly back at him. 12 seconds, I counted. Not because I was measuring, because I needed something to hold on to while I stood inside the most complete silence I had ever felt in a room full of 300 people talking. Then a guest touched my elbow and asked about the restoration of the bronze fixtures. I turned and answered them. My voice was perfectly steady. The guest who asked about the bronze fixtures was a woman named Patricia, a retired interior designer from Memphis who had driven 4 hours specifically because she had read the Architectural Digest feature and wanted to see the lobby in person. She was warm and specific and asked excellent questions, and I gave her my full attention for 11 minutes because she deserved it and because I had learned somewhere in the process of building 2 hotels that the work speaks best when you let it. When she moved away toward the string quartet, I looked back toward the entrance. Frank was gone. I found him 20 minutes later, standing alone near the east wall of the main room, holding a glass of sparkling water he hadn't touched, looking at a section of original terrazzo floor I had preserved behind a low glass barrier with a small placard explaining its history. 1931. Installed by Italian craftsmen brought over specifically for this building. The pattern was geometric, deep burgundy, and cream worn smooth by 60 years of postal workers walking across it. Frank was looking at it the way he looked at things he respected but didn't know how to say so. I walked over and stood beside him. Neither of us spoke for a moment. "You preserved the floor," he said finally, not a question. "It would have been wrong to cover it." He nodded slowly, his glass turned in his hand. Then quietly, without looking at me, "Did you know when you hired him?" "Yes." His jaw tightened. "Did you plan it?" "No. He applied through the standard portal. Marcus hired him on his own assessment. I approved it after the fact." I paused. "He was qualified for the role. I didn't treat him differently than any other candidate." Frank was quiet for a long time. "He's parking cars," he said, low, almost to himself. "He's doing his job," I said, "which is more than he was doing in Scranton for 7 years. Frank flinched, small. But there, I didn't say it to wound him. I said it because it was true and because I had spent enough of my life softening true things for the comfort of people who had never once softened anything for me. "I didn't know," Frank said, "about the loans, about any of it. Not until—" "I know you didn't," I said. "That's its own problem, Dad, but it's not mine to solve." He turned to look at me then. Really look. The way he almost never had when I was growing up direct without the filter of his opinions about what I was and wasn't worth. He looked older than I expected. tired in a way that went deeper than the back injury. "This place," he said. He gestured a short, incomplete gesture that seemed to mean the lobby, the ceiling, the bronze fixtures, all of it. "You built this?" "Yes, the whole thing. Every line of it." He looked back at the terrazzo floor. "I didn't think you could," he said. It was not an apology. It was something else, an admission unwrapped, carefully offered, without decoration. The closest Frank Mercer had ever come in my presence to saying he was wrong. I let it sit there between us for a moment. "I know you didn't," I said. "Donna found me near the end of the evening when the crowd had thinned to the last 40 or 50 guests and the string quartet had shifted to something quieter and slower. She looked tired in the way people look tired when they have been holding themselves carefully for hours. Her dress was a pale blue that suited her. She looked for a moment like the woman she might have been if she had made different choices a long time ago. She took my hand, both of hers around one of mine. "We didn't know it was this bad with Derek," she said. "We really didn't." I looked at her. "I told you something was wrong," I said. "3 years ago, at the kitchen table in Scranton, I put the documents right in front of you." She looked down. "You looked at your plate," I said. Not harshly, just precisely. "You've been looking at your plate my whole life, Mom, every time it mattered." Her hands tightened around mine. "I know," she whispered. "I know you know." We stood like that for a moment, her hands around mine, the music low behind us, the lobby warm and full of the particular golden light I had spent weeks calibrating. Then I said what I needed to say. "Derek keeps his job as long as he does it well, not because he's family, because that's the policy, and it applies to everyone. I won't pay the bank debt. That's Frank's name on that loan, not mine." I paused. "The house on Elm Court, the bank put it up for sale in January. I bought it." Donna's breath caught. "I'm not taking it from you," I said quickly. "You can stay, both of you, but I need you to sign a lease. A real one with a real monthly payment at market rate. Not because I need the money, because I need it to be real. I need there to be a structure that means something." She was crying now, quietly, the way she did everything. "Okay," she said, very small. "Okay," I said. I squeezed her hands once, then I let go. Derek found me at 10:45 when his shift had ended and most of the guests had filtered out. The lobby was nearly empty. The cleaning crew had begun their quiet work in the corners. The string quartet had packed up an hour ago. He was still in his uniform. He stood in the corridor outside the main room, hands in his pockets, and he looked for the first time in my memory uncertain. Not performing, not deflecting, just standing there uncertain the way a person stands when they have run out of versions of themselves to present. "I didn't know it was your place," he said. I looked at him for a moment. "I know," I said. "That's the point." He nodded slowly. Something moved across his face that I didn't have a name for. Not shame exactly, not quite remorse. Something earlier than both of those things, the beginning of an understanding that had a long way yet to travel before it arrived anywhere useful. "Marcus says you're a good worker," I said. Derek blinked. He hadn't expected that. "I'm trying," he said. "Good." I picked up my jacket from the chair beside me. "Keep trying. That's all anyone here is asked to do." I walked past him toward the stairs. At the bottom of the staircase, I stopped and turned back. "Derek." He looked up. "I'm glad you applied." He didn't say anything. I went upstairs. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening, my phone rang at 9 o'clock. I was at my desk reviewing the early design sketches for the Asheville property. I let it ring twice, saw the Scranton area code, and answered. Frank's voice, quieter than I had ever heard it, slower, as if each word had been examined carefully before being released. I was wrong about you, he said. 3 words. No elaboration, no context, no performance. Just 3 words in a voice that sounded like it had traveled a very long distance to get to me. I sat with them for a moment. I know, Dad, I said. I meant it without bitterness. I meant it the way you mean a fact that has stopped needing to hurt you. Something you can hold without flinching because you have already built your life around its absence and the life is good. He said goodnight. I said goodnight. I set the phone down. I looked at the Asheville sketches for a long time. Then I picked up my pencil and went back to work. It is March now. I am 29 years old. I am sitting at my desk on the 3rd floor of the Mercer House in Nashville, Tennessee, with a cup of coffee that has gone cold and a set of preliminary sketches spread across the surface in front of me, the early bones of what will become the Mercer Valley, a 30-room property outside Asheville, North Carolina, set into a hillside overlooking the French Broad River. Ground breaks in September. On the wall to my left, the acceptance letter hangs in its frame. The paper has yellowed a little more since I first put it there. The ink is still crisp. I don't read it often anymore. I don't need to. It has become part of the room the way the timber beams are part of the room's structural load-bearing present without demanding attention. I look at it sometimes when I'm tired, when a permit is delayed, or a contractor misses a deadline, or a material comes in wrong and I have to make decisions I didn't budget time for. I look at it and I remember 17 years old and a kitchen table and a man who folded my future in half and slid it back across the table without looking up. And then I turn back to my sketches because that is the only answer that has ever mattered. The Mercer House is fully booked through July. The Mercer Post has a 4-month waiting list for weekend rooms. Simone, my project architect, is managing the Asheville design process with a steadiness that makes me grateful every single day that I hired her. Will, the junior designer, has started bringing ideas to meetings instead of just questions. Ray, the construction manager, called last week to say the Asheville site prep is running 2 weeks ahead of schedule. I have a staff of 31 people across both properties. I have a 3rd property in development. I have the letter on the wall. I have all of this, and most days it feels exactly like what it is. The result of 12 years of work, one decision at a time, in the specific direction of something I loved before anyone told me I was allowed to. Rosalind moved to Nashville in January. She rents an apartment 6 blocks from the Mercer House, a bright 2nd-floor unit with good north light that she has already filled with the particular ordered accumulation of a woman who has spent her life noticing beautiful things. Drafting tools she no longer uses but cannot part with, books organized by subject rather than author, a drafting table by the window that he swears is just for reading, but that I have seen covered in sketches more than once when I stop by unannounced. She comes to the hotel on Tuesday mornings. We have coffee in the courtyard garden, and she looks at whatever I am working on, and she asks the questions that nobody else thinks to ask. Not about budget or timeline or client expectations, but about intention, about what a space is trying to do, about whether what is on the page matches what is in my head. She is the best design advisor I have ever had. She refuses to accept a fee. We argued about this twice. I stopped arguing. Some things are not transactions. Last Tuesday, she brought a small package to our coffee. Brown paper tied with kitchen string. Inside was a sketchbook, The same brand, the same size as the ones I had used in high school. On the inside cover, she had written in her careful architect's hand for the third one. ER. I put it on my desk next to the Asheville sketches. I haven't opened it yet. I'm saving it for the day I stand in that hillside space for the first time and look up and begin to see what it could become. Frank and Donna signed the lease on the Elm Courthouse in November. Donna called to tell me the check was in the mail. Her voice was steady in a way it hadn't always been. She asked about the hotels. I told her about the Asheville project. She listened, really listened, asking a follow-up question about the hillside site that surprised me with its specificity. I don't know where she learned to ask it. Maybe she had been paying more attention than I knew. Frank got on the line at the end of the call. Brief, practical. He asked whether the lease renewed annually or on a longer term. I said annually with a right of first renewal. He said that was reasonable. I said I thought so too. We didn't talk about the grand opening. We didn't talk about Derek or the loans or the kitchen table or the 7 words. We talked about the lease terms and the annual renewal and whether the furnace would need servicing before winter. It was the most normal conversation I had ever had with my father. I held on to that, not as a sign that everything was repaired. It wasn't and may never be, and I have made my peace with that, but as evidence that something had shifted, that the space between us, while still wide, was no longer filled with the same static it used to be. That was enough. I made it enough. Derek is still at the Mercer Post. He has not been given special treatment. He has not been promoted. He shows up on time, does his job, and goes home. Marcus says he is reliable, which is more than could have been said of him at any previous point in his adult life. He is taking 2 classes at a community college on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, business administration and communications. He is paying for them himself. We have not had a long conversation. We have not processed our history or assigned blame or arrived at any formal understanding of what we are to each other now. What we have is this. Occasionally when I come through the entrance of the Mercer Post in the evening and he is on shift, he nods. I nod back. Sometimes he says, "Good evening." I say, "Good evening." The exchange lasts 4 seconds and contains, if you know how to read it, more than either of us would know how to say out loud. I think that is probably enough. For now, I want to tell you something before I go. I did not build the Mercer house to prove something to my father. I built it because I was born knowing how to look at a space and see what it could become, and somewhere along the way, I decided that no one else's inability to see that gift was going to keep me from using it. The letter on my wall is not a trophy. It is a document, evidence of something that was true before anyone acknowledged it and remained true after everyone had the chance to weigh in. Your worth does not begin when someone recognizes it. It begins when you do. I learned that in a parking lot in the cold at 17 years old with $430 in a shoebox and a brochure from a school my father said I didn't need. I learned it again every year after that in every space I walked into and rebuilt from the bones up. The building doesn't care about the people who said it couldn't exist. It just stands there and does what it was made to do. That is the only answer that has ever mattered, and it is the only one I intend to keep giving. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to build your life as proof of something someone refused to believe? How did it change you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, check out the video in the description Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.